Hey, it's Zach. It seems like a foregone conclusion that the Jacksonville Jaguars will take Trevor Lawrence with the first pick in the NFL draft, but who will the Jets, Jets, just take at number two? What about the Dolphins with the third pick? Check out First Draft with Mel Kiper Jr., Todd McShay, and Field Yates for updated mock drafts, big board risers and fallers, and more. You can find First Draft wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, the Lowe Post.
Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast on a somber day, the 1-year anniversary of the death of Kobe Bryant and his daughter Gigi and other passengers in their helicopter. And to help us commemorate that day and remember Kobe Bryant, I think it's very fitting that we begin with the three most anticipated words in niche basketball podcasts, which were uttered by Kobe Bryant to my guest. And they are, "What up, Beck?"
What's happening, Zach? Thank you for having me on this somber day, which I don't even know. I don't even know how to process this a year later. Still, it's strange. And I'll tell you this before we get into it. One of the things I've noticed in the last day or so, couple of days, and working on a couple of stories about this and some video for SI and everything. I've realized this still hits me in a way that I don't quite understand. Like, none of us in this business, I think, were like close to Kobe. You know, I covered him for a bunch of years and up close, and then covered him a bunch of years from a distance. And the more I reread stuff and the more I talk about it, I can't even understand my own emotional response, which is a strange thing to say out loud. But I find myself, as I start to reread stuff, getting really choked up and emotional again. And this is not a family member. It's not a friend. It's somebody I covered and was fond of. Also had some really tense, rough moments with over the years. It still hits me really freaking hard. So I can only imagine for people who idolized him, who were mentored by him, who were passionate fans of his. I can only imagine the way this affects people still. So yeah, a year later, it still kind of rattles me a little in a way that I'm not sure I understand.
It feels at the same time like it just happened and it happened in another lifetime. Yesterday, I found myself surprised that a year had already passed.
Yeah.
But also because of the pandemic, everything that was pre-pandemic feels like it happened in a world that's 1,000 miles away. So even just digesting the time and everything is a little bit confusing. So a year ago today, I was flying to Los Angeles from New York, and we had just reached whatever feet that the Wi-Fi kicks in. And I was sitting down, so we had just taken off, and I was opened up my laptop and was going to pre-write some of my 10 things column to try to use my time wisely, get ahead of the week. I was going out for a week on the jump, and we got this email from our news team saying, "Hey, TMZ is reporting that Kobe Bryant is among the passengers who died in this helicopter crash." And I just remember sitting there thinking, what? This is obviously going to be a hoax like everybody else thought. And I'll just never, that whole flight, we had 5 hours left in the flight to the place where Kobe Bryant played and had so many beloved fans. It was a very strange sensation even then. And I find the whole "where were you" thing a little bit morbid, and I don't really want to get into it so much more. But you wrote a piece today that I thought I didn't really have the energy to write anything more on Kobe. I wrote a big piece the day after he passed last year about him and what he meant to the game and his we'll say interesting personality. And you wrote a piece today that I thought I'm glad you wrote this particular angle, and the angle is where Kobe Bryant's game, style, and spirit sort of lives on in current NBA players. And you chose 5 or 6 sort of avatars for various aspects of Kobe's personality. Why did you choose that route? And the one that I want you to dig into the most, because I think it's the most interesting, is Christian Wood. What drew you to Christian Wood of all people? When I think of Kobe Bryant, I do not think of Christian Wood. Perpetually late, somewhat unreliable. Many teams passed on him because of things that are very not Kobe, right? Like, does he have it in him? Does he have the be great mentality in him? So I was surprised to see him there.
So was I, because when I first came up with this particular story idea many, many weeks ago, Christian Wood was not on my mind at all. So, I started at Sports Illustrated in December. Within the first couple of weeks, we start talking about, hey, look, this anniversary is coming up, and what are we going to do for this anniversary? And I like you, Zach, I didn't want to revisit the day. I didn't want to do anything that felt morbid. I didn't want to do anything. All of us who were in this business who wrote about him or talked about him in the wake of his death a year ago, if we had personal experiences, as you did, as I did, if we had certain insights based on covering him, like we emptied the notebooks then and poured our hearts out then, and all my best remembrances of him, my emotions about the moment, about everything, I poured into a column that I wrote a year ago today. And as I've said many times, the hardest thing I've ever had to write. And I didn't want to tap into that again. I felt like I said what I needed to say, and that was it. And so I wanted to find something that was a little bit more uplifting. And, it sounds almost trite to say, well, Kobe's spirit lives on, but it does in so many different ways, in the ways he inspired people and in all these different aspects of the game today. So what I thought was, if we were to take all of Kobe's best traits and list them, who matches that in today's NBA? And so the big shot mentality, those big moments, that's clearly Damian Lillard, although there are other guys you could plug into that. Certain aspects of Kobe's mid-range game, I could go Devin Booker, could go DeMar DeRozan, Jason Tatum. And then I thought about Kobe even off the court. His advocacy for women's and girls basketball was a real hallmark of his later years. And right now that's Steph Curry. So what I did was I listed in the main story a bunch of different aspects that I think are represented in today's league, where people are carrying on the best of Kobe. And then I broke out 5 players. Damian Lillard is the big shot guy. Steph Curry is the WNBA advocate. Draymond Green as the voice of blunt candor, or as I was jokingly referring to it in my notes to editors, the DGAF mentality.
I know what that stands for. I'm hip enough to know what that stands for.
Strangely enough, it was Shaq who, my early years covering Shaq, at one point had replaced his nameplate of O'Neal on his locker at the Forum with a nameplate that was IDGAF. And then he would come up with fake acronyms to make it sound like it was something other than what it was. Anyway, and then I had Jimmy Butler as the workout fiend. And who am I missing? That was those 4.
Russell Westbrook is the angry dunker.
Oh, and Russell Westbrook as the vengeful dunker.
I know your piece better than you. How am I telling you what's in your piece? What kind of preparation level is this? This is not a Kobe Bryant level preparation from you.
This is Kobe Bryant level badgering by you.
Charmin, you're soft as Charmin, Beck.
Guilty. So there was those 5 that I settled on to do these breakout, like 400-word mini, capsules on. Christian Wood led the story and got me into the whole concept, because while I was working on this story and had put out a bunch of calls to a bunch of different people trying to get Dame and Steph and Draymond and some others, I'm watching that TNT broadcast, whatever it was, a week and a half ago.
The Casuals?
The Casuals one. So Christian Wood gets the post-game interview, and Shaq says, I didn't really know who you were. He kept referring to him as Woods instead of Wood.
Yeah, Shaq is on one right now on the post-game show.
Yeah.
I don't know what he was trying to do with Donovan. Anyway, we're going to talk about Shaq later, because I think the Kobe Shaq relationship and just early Kobe, which you covered up close, is so interesting and fascinating. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. So Ernie Johnson has the first question to Christian Wood, and it's something about the mindset of the Rockets in the wake of the Harden deal. And Christian Wood's first 2 words, literally his first 2 words in his first ever live national TNT post-game interview, are Mamba mentality. And then he talks for another couple minutes, and 2 more times he mentions Mamba mentality. And yes, everything you said about Christian Wood is, of course, true. And his circuitous path as an NBA player, there are reasons for that. But the guy's become a breakout star of a certain level this season and got his first big payday and everything else. He's playing great for the Rockets. And to the extent that Christian Wood has gotten his career together and gotten himself together and become focused and more responsible and a more productive player, it's because, in his words, of the Mamba mentality. And I didn't know, I don't think I was aware at the moment he said that, Christian Wood grew up in Long Beach, California as a big Kobe fan, was 5 years old when they won their first championship in 2000. I just knew immediately I'm looking for guys who are avatars of certain aspects of Kobe. I didn't think about the phrase Mamba mentality at all, except for with respect to his book, which went into some of the other things that I thought were, important traits about Kobe and his game and his work ethic and all that. I was not going to use Christian Wood in any way in this game, in this story. It was going to be Dame Lillard and Steph and Draymond and the rest of these guys. And then he said that, and I thought there's more there. So thanks to Rockets PR, to Tracy and Sean for getting me Christian after a practice a few days later. And we talked a little bit about Kobe. And yeah, he grew up on him. He idolized him. He wanted to be him. He, tried to emulate all of his moves. And I just thought, this is a guy who, for all of his imperfections and very, look, he's a center. There's nothing Kobe about him. He grew too big to be Kobe, among other things. But the fact that a journeyman center who's 25, who's bounced between all these different teams, and who's had the most un-Kobe-like career, nevertheless, is a guy who, when you ask him how he got to the point he's at, and his first words are Mamba mentality, it just speaks to Kobe's impact, his influence, and yes, speaks to the premise that I was forwarding in this story, which is that his spirit does live on in all these various ways, including in places where you would not have expected it, like Christian Wood.
I was drawn to Christian Wood in your story because of what he said. And here's what he said. I'll spoil a small chunk of your story.
Go for it.
I would say 70 to 80% of players are living through what Kobe has put out, says Wood. And that's his mentality. It's his approach to the game and just, his winning mindset. It was just his determination, Wood says, his determination to take the last shot. And that line struck me because when I thought about Kobe Bryant and when I went back and watched a lot of his old games and read a lot of stuff about him in the wake of all this, he really is one of the only players who transcended all the normal ways we talk about sports. And I mean that in that to his fans and to even neutral fans who didn't particularly care for him and to players, all of this, the ways we normally talk about basketball, statistics, efficiency, everything other than the championships, the 5 rings, which is the only statistic that really matters, it all missed the point of Kobe Bryant. It wasn't anything to do with why people gravitated toward Kobe Bryant. He became almost an ideology unto himself before he ever said the words Mamba mentality, before he essentially branded an ideology. He stood for fearlessness and courage late in games and is sort of like impenetrable will and daring that people wished they had in themselves. And so when you would debate about, he actually is just a so-so clutch shooter if you break down the numbers, and he takes too many mid-range shots, and boy, I wish he would pass more before the triple teams came, and blah, blah, blah. All of it, the way we talk about LeBron even in like traditional normal basketball terms, all of that missed the point. Kobe Bryant became something ineffable, something bigger than the sport, something where the actual X's and O's and stuff didn't matter. He stood for something. He became really, this is what I wrote in my remembrance of him, he became an ideology. And that's what Christian Wood is talking about. Christian Wood doesn't care about the statistics, about whatever. He just saw somebody who said, I can do anything and I will take any risk and I will take any shot and I want it all on me. And it doesn't matter if he's 5 for 26 in the last 90 seconds of games it doesn't matter. It's just the act and the style and the will to do it that ended up mattering more than anything else. And he became, it's that the way people talk about him and process him is different. The only player I can really think of in recent vintage like that is Allen Iverson for completely different reasons. the analysis of Allen Iverson, the devotion to Allen Iverson was about something much more than basketball and efficiency. He stood for something grander than that in a much different way than Kobe did. And that's what I thought Christian Wood brought out in your story, is just he became an idea and an aspiration and a style more than a basketball player.
Yes, it's the audacity of Kobe, right? It's the audacity of the kinds of shots he might take, and when he would take them, that he would take them at all, and that he would make them. Like and not always, right? And people can get into the efficiency, and then you can get into the clutch time stats and all this other stuff. Even that stuff, to an extent, as you say, misses the point.
Even players who on the surface did not play like Kobe, or played on teams that did not play anything like Kobe, because Kobe at the end of his career, it's hard to remember now, it almost became like carnival-esque the way he was playing. I remember watching a game. I was in Washington, D.C. after a Wizards game. I went out to drinks with a couple of people who were scouts types who were at the game. And the Lakers game was the late game on TNT, and it was during Kobe's either last or second to last year when he was just playing this like grotesque, antiquated basketball. And we were joking. Like the executives were like, "Oh, I wonder who's going to take the last shot." And they called the timeout. And I think Byron Scott was the coach then. I can't remember. And the executive I was with was like, I wonder what Kobe's saying to the coach right now. Like, oh, he draw up the play. Like it became sort of carnival-esque by the end. But even then, Dirk Nowitzki, the 2016 Hawks, or the 2015 Hawks, the 60-win Hawks team, who played this egalitarian style, they all told me, we're just obsessed with Kobe. We still watch every second of Kobe. We still can't take our eyes off Kobe. It just was something more than sports.
Yeah, and look, the fact is, first of all, I think people needed to, when they're assessing Kobe, like throw out the last several years there. Certainly everything after the Achilles injury. And there are even some other spaces in there where I think Kobe went into overdrive and yeah, overdid it at times. But Kobe at his best could actually be really efficient and could be a great distributor. And we're going to, at some point in this pod, talk about our favorite game. And I'm going to go with a different one than I normally do, in part because I want to underscore something about when Kobe was at his best, how just ruthlessly efficient he was and could be. Yes, there were times where he went to extremes. But if you were a Laker fan or if you were a Kobe fan, I think you accepted that because you knew he could make that shot through the triple team. He could split that double team. He could make that off-balance one-footer. And part of the thrill is when he tries to pull off the impossible and then does. And if he doesn't, you just have this incredible admiration for the fact that he even attempted it, because most guys wouldn't. And a lot of the guys who might attempt it, by the way, didn't have the skill level or didn't put in the preparation. And that goes to one of the things that Damian Lillard said for my story, which was when you talk about what it takes to be great in the clutch and to take those shots and be confident and fearless in taking them, it's because you prepared. And one of the lessons that Kobe taught him early in his career was about preparation and certain kinds of preparation. And, Kobe had the confidence to take those shots, even if they weren't the quote unquote the best shot or the most efficient shot, or Shaq was open and you should have hit him. Kobe could take those because Kobe had worked his freaking tail off to be prepared for those moments and to take those exact shots at those weird ass angles, because he probably practiced all those weird ass angles. So, that's the real lesson there. And yeah, we could all go back. Kobe himself could go back because he's so smart about the game and could have looked back and said, yeah, probably should have, passed there. Probably should have taken that one back. Probably should have driven the other
He
direction.
has done that at times in detail. He broke down a couple of his own games, or at least one of his own games in detail, and he spotlighted a very sulky Trevor Ariza who was wide open and Kobe didn't pass to him, and you saw Trevor just all the air came out of him, and Kobe was like, "Yeah, I probably should have made that pass."
But he, in Kobe's mind, and this was certainly the case during the Shaq and Kobe years and amid all their tussle, in Kobe's mind, he had earned those moments and he had earned those shots because he had worked his ass off and had perfected those shots and had prepared for those moments and had studied all the film, and he knew that if the defense was going to come at him this way, his counter was going to be this, and that's how he was going to get to his shot or get to his spot. And yeah, like, how do you argue with that? He did. He put in all the work. He put in all the hours. He put in all the film study. He put in all the workouts. He put in all the work to refine his arsenal of shots. And so, yeah, like, how can you argue with the fact that he had earned those moments? Now, again, at the end, you could still say, well, technically that wasn't the best shot. Okay, fine. But you can't, it's hard to argue with the mindset. And when people are drawn to that, especially players who, more than anybody, could probably watch this and say, yeah, good shot, bad, shouldn't have taken that one. And yet players almost universally admired and looked up to him because they knew what went into it. And they also knew he, even on the ones he missed, he could have made them because he was that good. And so, like, whoever you are in this league, wherever you are in the pecking order, and including the Christian Woods of the world, you don't have to be able to achieve everything that Kobe did or be as skilled as he was or even necessarily work as hard as he did. I think the lesson is that he set this incredibly high standard and you strive for it. You may never get there. Very few people are going to achieve, full Kobe-ness, but it's aspirational. It's, man, that guy busted his ass and did all these things and then achieved greatness, but it's not the greatness that we care about. To your point, the 5 rings, sure, they matter, but it's how he got there. And that's what's so inspirational about him. And that's why so many guys looked up to him. And it really is like, it would be interesting to poll all 450 players at any given time and see how many would say that Kobe was their favorite player or one of their primary inspirations. I think
I can't remember whether it's the last season, Phil's book about the 2004 Lakers, which you are featured in a few times in controversial fashion, Mr. Beck, or Jeff Pearlman has a relatively new book called 3 Ring Circus that I'm about halfway through about the Shaq Kobe era. Somewhere in there, either Jim Buss or somebody said, or Jerry Buss says, our fan mail runs 5-1 Kobe over Shaq when they're talking about which are we going to keep when this becomes untenable. And part of it is that guards are always more identifiable for regular people than Goliath, right? But part of it is this, and it's all, and this is, I want to get into the Shaq Kobe era now, because in rereading the last season and in reading Jeff Pearlman's book, it really reminds you, like, Kobe was an incredibly difficult personality and oftentimes very, very unpopular with teammates, not just Shaq, and maybe especially not just Shaq. Like, Jeff Pearlman goes into Kobe's first 2 summer leagues in the NBA in his book, 3 Ring Circus, buy it. The summer league teammates hated him, hated Kobe. He wouldn't pass the ball. He was selfish. He was greedy. He thought he was the best player on the floor. He took particular offense to Jimmy King from the Fab Five's presence on one of those teams and went out of his way to belittle Jimmy King in a way that people made uncomfortable. This is all before Shaq. And if anything, the Kobe Shaq stuff is worse than people remember. It was worse. Their relationship was worse. It was nastier. Jeff Pearlman's book opens with the story of Kobe Bryant punching Samaki Walker in the face in 2002. Do you remember that story?
Yes.
Did you cover it?
Yes.
Do you remember the backstory?
I did not remember the backstory until I read Jeff Pearlman's book and said, like, I remembered that they had fought and I remembered certain pieces of it. And I kind of remembered, I could like picture where we were in the arena the next day to ask Samaki about it and that kind of stuff. I did not remember the grisly details of it. As I recall now, having read the book, and I read it months ago, so it's faded a little bit, but it was about a bet, right? And about paying up a bet, and Samaki's holding it over.
They do a half-court shooting competition with money on the line after practice, the whole team, and Kobe wins it. And so everybody owes him some trivial amount of money, like $20 or I can't remember. It's not a lot of money for an NBA player. And Samaki just doesn't have it on him, just has no cash on him, as people want to have no cash on him. And so Kobe bugs him and gets on the bus, and he's cursing up a blue streak, which people thought was quite funny because it was not the way Kobe had ever been before. He was I think it's Jelani McCoy says in the book, just calls him phony. He was trying on his Beanie Siegel personality is what Jelani, because where's my fucking money, Mock? Where the is my money, Mock? And Samaki Walker's like, don't talk to me like that. And Kobe just clocks him in the face. And the story goes on to get even worse. Samaki Walker gets up to fight Kobe. And Shaq, according to Jeff Pearlman's telling, is in the background on the bus saying, him up, Samaki. Like he wants Samaki Walker to beat up Kobe Bryant. And then they stop the bus. Samaki Walker says, stop the bus. They're on the bus back from practice. And dares Kobe, all right, let's go. Let's get off the bus. And Kobe doesn't get off the bus, and Samaki Walker tells him, that's what I thought. And then Kobe calls him that night at the hotel crying, apologizing for everything. And it's just like, it's all, the reason I bring it, and you know, you were there, he calls Shaq fat, out of shape, the whole, just over and over, they fight about everything. He wants the ball. As a rookie, he's telling Del Harris, his first coach, well, if he just cleared Shaq out of the lane, me, 18-year-old Kobe Bryant, like who knows what I could do? I could probably put up 35. Just get the big guy out of the way. It's all part of the package. Without all the unpleasantness of what he was as a teammate at times and as a human being at times, you don't get. And the unpleasantness includes all the crazy shots that missed. You don't get the crazy shots that hit. You don't get 5 championships. You don't get 30,000 or whatever points. You don't get it, because from the same wellspring that all of that sort of cantankerous behavior came the practices, the drills, the work ethic, the honing of the footwork, all of the stuff that went into making Kobe what he was. But I mean, you can attest to this, like young Kobe Bryant. I mean, you enjoyed being around him. I don't know that how many teammates at the time enjoyed being around him.
Yeah, and that, like a lot of things, was not linear. There were good moments and bad moments and good years and bad years. And in the 7 years I covered him from 97 to 04, even the Shaq and Kobe thing, it was like they hate each other. They're winning championship and jumping into each other's arms. Now they hate each other again. They're putting it back together again. And so it was up and down, and it was the same with teammates. And, you know, there were guys, look, you know, he and Derek Fisher, who came in together in 96, you know, a few years apart in age, because, you know, Fish went to college and Kobe came straight out of high school, but like they came in together as rookies and were always tight. And like Rick Fox and Brian Shaw, who were veterans, who I think, you know, at times felt the challenge of working with Kobe, dealing with Kobe, playing with Kobe, nevertheless were fond of him. Maybe other guys a little less so. And a lot of guys had to kind of, you know, navigate between Shaq and Kobe. And, you know, Kobe wasn't going out. We know this, you know, with all the infamous stories of Kobe being a loner and not having, you know, first of all, he was younger, so he wasn't going to the clubs with them initially anyway, because he wasn't of age. And then just his personality, he kind of kept his own counsel. And so there was an age divide, and there was just Kobe's own insular nature in his earlier years. It took him a while to really, this is the thing, like, and I've said this on your podcast before, probably, Zach, you know, Kobe gets to the league at age 18. He wins his first championship. I think he's 22. The fight with Samaki that you're talking about, I think he's 23. Like, everybody in their late teens, early 20s, even through mid 20s is still kind of finding themselves. And the case with Kobe and a lot of NBA players that we see maybe stumble at times or have to work through things, it's because they're growing up in this searing spotlight that the rest of us, you know, did not have to deal with in our own dull lives. So, yeah, there's certain things that are just, you know, inescapable truths about who Kobe was at that time. But a lot of this is just him, I think, trying to figure out who he's going to be, who he is, you know, how to work with these older players and how to become the superstar that he knows in his mind he's destined to be, but within this team concept. And yeah, he didn't go to college to go learn from Dean Smith or Coach K or somebody about how to play within a system. And, you know, and Shaq did him no favors. Shaq, you know, the book puts Kobe in a like Jeff Pearlman's book puts Kobe in a pretty harsh light. And I'm not saying that any of that is inaccurate. These are firsthand accounts from former teammates and others. But I think what got overlooked at times in his book, and gets overlooked at times by everybody, Shaq was pretty brutal to Kobe from day one, kept him at arm's length, kind of ostracized him, mocked him, dubs him showboat. It was not,
Yep.
it was not meant as a compliment. And it was hard on Kobe. Here you are, you're 18 years old. Yeah, you're acting as if you already own the league, sure, but that's just covering up for whatever, insecurity as a kid who's trying to find his way in a league of men who are all, much older, more established. Like, he knows what his talent level is, but he doesn't have their experience or their life experience. And so it was important for him to be embraced. And instead of being embraced, he was put on an island early on. And I think that was really difficult. And so that's not to let Kobe off the hook for any of his own behavior over that period of time. It's just to say that the environment was not particularly welcoming. Shaq could have done a lot better. I think Shaq himself would probably admit that now.
I think he has. And of course they reconciled, and
Yes.
several times and did podcasts together and everything. Kobe, you mentioned he was sort of a loner and all that. I think one of the through lines when you read about Kobe and talk about Kobe is that he had a little bit of an awkwardness to him. Several of his teammates describe him as socially awkward in several books that have been written, at least tangentially, about him. And everyone knows the story, right? You grow up a fish out of water in Italy, and then you come back a fish out of water in suburban Philadelphia. And I think that's part of what made, the accident hit even deeper than it would have anyway as a tragedy was there was always a sense that Kobe was, and his teammates talk about this freely in several different books, like trying on different personalities. Like there was almost something performative, even late in his career when he became the foul-mouthed old man, calling people Charmin, soft as whatever. There was always something performative about it. Like you never got the sense that who is he really, right? And so who he was really, and that's why, Kobe Bryant, girl dad, and advocate for girls basketball and coach of girls basketball, that was the time I think when a lot of people, even if it didn't dawn on them consciously, it was like, this is a new version of him that I haven't seen before. Even his face, smiling more. And it had the sense of, after years of transitioning from one personality to the next and being a little bit of a loner and being awkward, he's growing into what he was supposed to be. It felt like that. And that's what made it hit home even more, I think.
Yes, absolutely. That is absolutely the case. The fully formed, fully realized, fully evolved Kobe was the one we saw his last few years. Starting late in his career after his daughters are born, but certainly into retirement and him becoming, a creator, a filmmaker, and a storyteller, and all these other things. And yes, a girl dad. That is what makes it that much more wrenching and tragic and hard to deal with the reality of his being gone, is that, like, that was the real Kobe at the end. Like, I know everybody wants, like, depending on how you view Kobe, whether you love him or hate him, there are people who are going to gravitate toward the Black Mamba era, and the way he played and the way he carried himself, and the coldness that there was sometimes with that, and the viciousness and sometimes even cruelty with teammates and all that, because there was something about it that we admire in sports, that if you were like a killer, and Kobe liked to refer to himself as a killer, and yeah, there's something, the machismo and the hyper-aggression there that is appealing in a sports prism. But I said this at the end when people were very cynically, and I mean his last couple of years in the league, when people were very cynically saying, oh, he's putting on this big charm offensive because he wants to go out with people liking him and he's trying to make up for this and that. Like, no, this is the guy I knew. This is the guy I met in 1997. And certainly a much older, wiser version of him. But Kobe was engaging and open and sometimes self-effacing and fun to talk to and a good guy. Like, I liked him from day one, those first couple of years. And then he got harder over time. His personality hardened, and he got more, distrustful. And there were a lot of things that happened to him in his life, with his family, with his teammates, with Shaq, that all changed him in certain ways. And, the Black Mamba emerges later. And that's, of course, after the sexual assault charge and everything else, too. And so a lot of things went into who he became in the mid-2000s that made people perceive him a different way. But when they saw it at the end, like, I don't blame anybody for at the end being a little cynical about it, thinking like, well, I never saw this Kobe before. Yeah, right. He had basically, covered that guy up. He had sequestered that part of his personality. I think the brighter, warmer, more open parts of his personality, and locked them up somewhere to become this Mamba thing instead. But what I saw at the end, and I remember talking to Robert Horry that night at his final game against Utah, and me asking him, "Am I crazy, or am I seeing this right? This is the real Kobe on some level. Not that the rest of it isn't also a part of him." And so then when I asked Kobe about it post game, after his final game, and he basically said, yeah, like this, granted, it's a little bit of Kobe doing the storyteller thing where he says, we're all both, right? We're all good and evil. We all got these different aspects to us. But he's right. And he highlighted one piece of himself for those years, and it attracted some people and it repelled others. But at the end, I'm telling you, the Kobe who was open and funny and blunt and engaging and warm, like that was the real Kobe. He created this other artifice for the purpose of winning a couple more titles without Shaq, and it was what he thought was necessary to get there.
Well, and you mentioned the sex assault charge, and I don't blame blah blah blah. I don't blame people who don't really want laudatory columns about Kobe Bryant in the wake of all this, because we don't know exactly what happened in that hotel room. We know that there was a case that was dropped because of a lot of really awful courthouse errors, including the release of the victim's name at one point. We know that Kobe Bryant apologized in saying, I quote, "I truly believe this encounter between us was consensual. I recognize now that she did not and does not view this incident the same way I did." And that's uncomfortable to read now. And it's just part of his story. And so he had an incentive to say all of us are part good and part evil. But, his determination, his unpleasantness as a teammate, his demand to seize the league upon entering, I mean, people forget now, he probably needed that because most people thought he was nuts to come out of high school and go into the NBA. Here's Marty Blake, the NBA scouting director. He's kidding himself, Blake told the Los Angeles Times. This is from Jeff Perlman's book. Sure, he'd like to come out now. I'd like to be a movie star. He's not ready. You watch Kobe Bryant and you don't see special, said Rob Babcock, Minnesota's director of player personnel. His game doesn't say, I'm a very special talent. I think it's a total mistake, said John Jennings, the Boston Celtics director of player development. Kevin Garnett was the best high school player I ever saw, and I would not have advised him to jump. And Kobe is no Kevin Garnett. I mean, that's what he was facing when, with his frankly ridiculous sunglasses, he declared to the world that he was taking his talents to the NBA. And so maybe you need a little bit of, let's say, edge to make it through that. And maybe the way you cope with whatever uncertainty you might be feeling is to shove that uncertainty down and replace it with something even beyond certainty that you belong, an arrogance and a confidence that is part projected and part real. Like, I'm ready. And maybe that's part of that. That's part of it too.
I think so. And it didn't even have to be conscious, Zach. It didn't even have to be a conscious thing. I'm going to create this other, this harder edge and this persona, whatever, just to survive. And I'm talking, pre-Mamba, even the early years where he's got this hard edge. Like, I think to the extent that he had to find his way in this league at age 18 as a skinny high school kid who makes this leap, I don't know that was all conscious. I think it was just he knew who he was. He knew what his talent he had. He knew what his drive was. He knew how much he was willing to work for it. And nobody else is going to be able to see that, right? You just read through it. All these scouts, all these guys who are paid a lot of money to identify. And by the way,
that's not to make fun of them. We're all going to be wrong all the time about players. I'm just trying to take you back in time to 1996, like what people were saying.
It's important to underscore that because yes, the people who were paid to identify talent weren't sure, but Kobe was sure. Like, Kobe knew what they didn't. Kobe knew himself. He knew what he was willing to do to get there. And so it's important to bring up what those guys said because that's the divide. Nobody else can see it. No one else can see it coming except for Kobe. And so, of course, he's got to then find a way to navigate that and then convince everybody. Or if he can't convince them, he's got to, I'm going to show them. And if they don't believe it, I'm going to go to extremes to show it. But he's the only one who believes it. He's the only one who understands it. He's the only one who, not to say that at age 18, he could see everything that would come in the next 20 years of his career, but he was the one who had the vision, who knew it was possible. And again, that's fine. Like, that is exactly what makes him this inspirational figure to so many. He saw in his own mind what his destiny was, or what he believed his destiny was, and nobody else could see it but him.
Stephen A. Smith goes beyond the headlines to unlock a unique world of hot takes, one-of-a-kind segments, and can't miss interviews. Stream all this and more on his new show, Stephen A's World. It's always a good world with Stephen A. Exclusively on ESPN Plus. Sign up now at espnplus.com. At the end of the Shaq Kobe era, the last season of the Shaq Kobe era, do you remember, Mr. Beck? Do you remember sitting down with the one and only Phil Jackson for a one-on-one, and Phil Jackson declaring to you, quote, Shaq is going to be the focal point, unquote, of the offense? Do you remember this?
Yes. We were at what was then the brand new Shishi Boutique Hotel in downtown Memphis. And we spent the majority of that conversation talking, I think, about Iraq. And then eventually got to, because I think that was around the time of the Iraq War, and we talked. This is how it always went. We would talk about all these other things first, and then I'd say, "Oh yeah, that's right. We're going to do a sit down, and I need to turn the tape recorder on so we can talk about Shaq and Kobe inevitably." Yes, I do recall that conversation.
Do you recall that it made Kobe angry?
Yes.
Hovering over all of that is Kobe is talking about maybe opting out. Phil's future, as I recall, it was obviously uncertain. It ended up being the first last season, right, Howard? I mean, there was all of this hovering over that team.
Yeah, the 03-04 season was tense from the beginning for a whole bunch of different reasons. And let's start with the fact that, Kobe is facing the sexual assault charge in Colorado. So there's that tension. He's having to go back and forth between LA and Colorado. And so it's a very tense year for him, period, alone. But the whole team, things were starting to fray. And we didn't know this was going to break up, but certainly the warning signs were there, because Kobe could opt out and had made a lot of noise about it behind the scenes, which I wrote about at one point that season, about the fact that he was threatening to go, and specifically to the Clippers. Shaq wanted an extension from Jerry Buss. Shaq, infamously during the preseason in Honolulu, is dunking and then turning toward Jerry Buss on the sideline saying, "Pay me," because he wanted this big extension that the Lakers weren't prepared to give him. So Shaq wasn't happy, and he's starting to feel some uncertainty about his future. Kobe can opt out. Kobe's facing very serious charges in Colorado. Phil's going to be a free agent, and Phil wanted an extension that Jerry Buss wasn't prepared to give. And at midseason, or around midseason, they officially broke off those talks. You got Gary Payton and Karl Malone coming in, being grafted on. The core that had won 3 titles around Shaq and Kobe had already begun to fray and age and dissipate. Ori's gone. Fox and Fisher are getting older. Horace Grant is a recycled piece they're using. So it was a tough season from the get-go.
And I wonder if you remember this. I had forgotten about this until I looked back at the last season. The tension between Shaq and Kobe was so bad at one point, this is according to Phil's book, that Shaq would not allow himself to be taped before a game by Gary Vitti, the legendary Lakers trainer, because he perceived that Gary Vitti was too close to Kobe. And so Kobe wouldn't like whoever on the training staff was close to Shaq, Chip Schaefer, Kobe wouldn't let that guy tape his ankle. So they had different ankle tapers or different body tapers. I mean, that is some superstar level pettiness between Shaq and Kobe. You have no memory of that. So that's a crazy detail. That's
one of those things that somebody probably, tells after the fact that you don't know about in real time. Because no, I did not know that until I learned it from Jeff Pearlman's book. But it does underscore again that, yes, as much as Kobe has had his faults and his immaturities and the things that the way that he acted that would help create this feud, Shaq, as the older player, the guy who should have been the bigger person, figuratively as well as literally, Shaq, that the fact that he would be that petty to that extreme, even that late in their time together, it says a lot.
And yet, they are one of the greatest duos in the history of professional sports. They led the Lakers to 3 consecutive championships, the ultra rare in the NBA three-peat, something the Spurs never repeated. The Warriors didn't manage a three-peat. It doesn't happen very often. And the middle of those championships in 2001 was the most dominant run, at least tied with the Warriors probably in 2017 for the most dominant run in the history of the NBA playoffs. 15-1, just absolutely curb stomped everyone. The only loss is the Allen Iverson step over game against the Sixers. And I just wonder, you covered that whole run. That's crazy. I'm so envious of that. I just wonder if you have any sort of favorite stories, flashbulb memories when you're 85 years old. These are going to be in your brain forever. And the one from your Kobe remembrance piece from a year ago that I had forgotten about until I reread it was that middle championship they win, and people are going crazy in the locker room. And I think you correct me if I'm wrong. You're one of the first people in there, one of the only people in there. Everyone's going crazy. They're listening to DMX, and you spot Kobe just sitting kind of in a corner by himself, deep in thought or something, which is a very evocative image and something I'd forgotten about.
Yeah, and I was happy to see this a year ago, or just it was nice to see in the wake of us losing Kobe. Somebody resurfaced this photo. It's of me in my old goofy glasses and my like bad Dockers or whatever, and I'm standing next to Kobe in that locker room in Philly. Kobe's in a championship Lakers jacket, and you can see he's kind of in a daze. They're just, the bliss of winning the second straight title. And I'm the only one standing there next to him because the whole rest of the team and whatever other media are in there are at the other end of this visiting locker room in Philly, where the whole Laker team is locked together, bouncing up and down in this big scrum, singing to DMX. Shaq's in the middle of it all. And yes, tellingly, poignantly, Kobe is off by himself to the side. And the reason that I was there for that moment was because, and I don't know if they still do this, but when you were a beat writer covering a team back then, the NBA PR would give you this special sticker to put on your credential so that after the game, you'd be one of the first let into the locker room to see the champagne celebration, to see all those moments before it got crowded and crazy. And so it was me and a couple of other beat writers, maybe, plus the Lakers and a couple cameras and NBA entertainment. And so I got to be there for that moment. And yeah, my immediate thought as I saw this bouncing, loud, boisterous scrum over at one side was to see Kobe to the side by himself at the other end of the locker room. And I walked up to go talk to him. And I remember like he was just very quiet, and it was. Do
you remember what you talked about at all?
You know what? If I'd known we were going to revisit that moment, I would have probably gone and tried to find that clip. I'm sure I must have quotes from the championship that night of Kobe talking about something.
I would love to go revisit those quotes. I'm sure you would too. So you're there for all of it. What other? I know you got games that stick with you, right? You got other moments that stick with you. What's a game that sticks with you?
Well, that same season, and this is a game I wanted to highlight. I often, when people say what was your favorite Kobe game, I usually gravitate toward Game 4 of the 2000 finals. That's the one where Shaq fouls out. Kobe's come back off of this horrific ankle injury that had knocked him out of Game 3, and he carries them in overtime. And it's his first real Jordan-esque kind of moment, which is how people saw it at the time. He's 21, and that's how everybody, that was when people knew. That was Kobe putting himself on the map. Was Game 4 of the 2000 finals. So that's the one I usually gravitate toward. But I'm going for a different one today, Zach. 2001, that same season we were just talking about that ends with them beating the Sixers in the finals for the second championship. That's the 15-1 run. That run, pieces of it in particular, just show you how dominant, how incredible Kobe was. And at that time, still only just 22 years old. Because I know when people think about the three-peat, they think, well, Shaq won the 3 MVPs and he earned them all. And he was incredible, just ridiculously dominant in those finals. but they don't get there without Kobe. And they don't get there without Kobe being a complete and even efficient and incredibly savvy player. This is not the caricature of Kobe. This is not gunner Kobe. This is not ignore my teammates and do it all on my own Kobe. This is the 2001 Western Conference Finals against the San Antonio Spurs. The Lakers do not have home court. They won 56 games, down from 67 their first year with Phil. But those Spurs win 58. The Lakers are 7-0 in the playoffs. They've won 15 straight going back to the regular season. They're on an incredible roll, but the Spurs are a phenomenal team with Duncan and Robinson.
The Borg.
The Spurs. Yes. And they have home court. So this is game 1 at the Alamo Dome. And Kobe goes for 45 points and 10 rebounds. And in the locker room afterward, Shaq walks over to him and calls him my idol, says, "You're my idol." And in the press conference afterward, Shaq says Kobe is, quote, the best player in the league by far. And the importance of that yes, they've already won one championship together. But as I've often said, this thing was a roller coaster. And this particular season, in December of this season, Shaq had given the quote about, if you want the big dog to guard the house, you got to feed him and give him toys and pet him and whatever.
I don't remember the toys part of it. I remember the food part. What? I don't remember toys.
There were toys. I looked it back up. There was something about toys. You got to play with the dog.
Shaq went the extra mile on that one.
He did love a good analogy, especially about guard dogs. And that was in December. In January of that year, not to be outdone, Kobe Bryant tells Rick Bucher, quote, turn my game down. I need to turn it up. I've improved. How are you going to bottle me up? I'd be better off playing someplace else, thus sowing the seeds of a potential.
Anytime Kobe Bryant did a sit down with a national reporter, especially Jim Gray, it was just guaranteed to light the Lakers on fire and inflame Shaq. Every time he did it, it was so, you got to hand it to him. He would just put it out there. He would call Shaq. He could told Jim Gray, Shaq can't show up fat anymore. If he's the best player on the team, he just called him fat.
Quick side note on that, though. This Rick Bucher quote, or the one to Buke, and the quotes to Jim Gray you're alluding to were really the only time he threw a grenade out like that. Like Shaq, it was a constant thing, just poking and prodding and throwing things out in the media and slightly shrouded comments, not shrouded at all comments. Like Shaq was the one always kind of trying to stir this up. Kobe usually held his tongue. A couple of times he didn't. He called out Shaq famously and in detailed fashion to Jim Gray. That also, by the way, I believe was at the beginning of that 03-04 season.
It was the fall of 2003.
So this is an 01, and he tells us stuff. He says this to Rick Bucher, and this stirs things up. So they're going through it again. It doesn't matter that there's this amazing photo of Kobe jumping into Shaq's arms after they beat the Pacers the year before, and all this. And I remember in the finals in 2001, between games at one point, I got to sit down with Shaq to ask him about how they had come apart again and were feuding again. And I said, in the course of the interview, I said something to the effect of, I thought you guys had solved this all. And he says, I did too. So They had to patch it back up again. This is what they did. They'd come apart, they patch it back up over and over. Game 1, Alamo Dome, Kobe, 45 and 10. Shaq calls him best player in the league by far. And people go to YouTube, type in 2001 Lakers Spurs Game 1 Kobe. And you'll see like a 12-minute reel of his highlights. He is incredible. Kobe, he's only 22, but it's like he's at the height of his powers. And he's efficient, he's skilled, he's deadly, he's graceful, he's everything you'd want in a superstar. He was incredible. And the reason I point to that one, Zach, not just what Shaq said and not just the meaning of that, but that whole series, Kobe was just dominant. Game 2, he goes for 28, 7, and 6. 7 rebounds, 6 assists. Shaq goes for 19 and 14. Game 3, Kobe goes for 36, 9, and 8. Shaq has 35 and 17. So he's outscored him in the first 3 games of the series. 4th game, Shaq leads with 26. Kobe goes for 24, 2, and 11 assists. So the last 2 games of that series, they sweep the Spurs. Kobe has 8 assists and 11 assists, in addition to being a dominant scorer. His averages for that 4-game sweep, 33, 7, and 7, shooting 51%. That's the Kobe I would like people to remember in terms of his playing career and his dominance and his skill level. And when he was focused and he was on, and he like I understand the caricature. I understand the stuff about Kobe being a mindless gunner and overdoing it and doing too much and ignoring teammates, and all those things happened at times. It's not the full picture by far. And there were times when he was a dominant scorer, times he was a dominant scorer and great playmaker simultaneously, as we saw in that series. And they sweep, they sweep the Spurs. Yeah, they then lose game one to the Sixers, and then they roll the Sixers. So that's the one I wanted to point to, just because I think it was Kobe at his absolute most dominant and against one of the greatest teams that they were going to face in the course of their run. And it had even Shaq kind of in awe.
The night of the helicopter crash, I was in the Ace Hotel in Los Angeles, watching old Kobe games, and I rediscovered this game from that run in 2001. And it's the second round against the Kings, who they also sweep because they just swept everybody. Kobe played 48 minutes, the whole game, not 1 second of rest, 48 points, 16 rebounds on 15 of 29 shooting, 17 made free throws, 16 rebounds, 9 offensive rebounds. At halftime, they're losing. Jim Gray interviews him. Now, we don't see the interview. We just hear Jim Gray's voiceover telling us about the interview. And Kobe tells him, it's the most fun I've had all year. And Jim Gray asks him why. And he says, because we're losing. And this is fun for me because this has been it's been too easy. We're losing. And the 9 offensive rebounds. So you mentioned the all around Kobe, the stuff about his craft and how he, his footwork and all of that stuff, how much work he put into it. That's all the stuff of legend. But I think what over all of that is he really did want to be great at every part of the game. And did his attention to detail on defense wane sometimes? Yes, particularly later in his career when he was making all defense teams he didn't deserve to be on. But he could be a great defensive player when he wanted to be. He could be a great passer when he wanted to be. Now, was he an anticipatory passer? Did he pass early in the way that LeBron James does, catching the defense early in their rotation? No, he waited for double and triple teams to come, but he was great at those kinds of late passes. Would you ideally have liked him to mix in more of the early stuff? You would see it now and then, but it wasn't really his forte. But the rebounding, and this was a little bit Jordan-esque of him. 2 of his most impactful plays are offensive rebounds. And in that Pacers game that you mentioned, game 4, when Shaq fouls out and it's a 2-1 series, they've lost game 3. Game 4 is pivotal. Kobe's solo in overtime. No Shaq for most of that overtime. He tips in. He gets I believe he tips it in. Yeah, he tips in somebody's miss to put the Lakers up 3 with like 6 seconds left. And then Reggie Miller misses a game-tying 3 at the end of or game-winning 3 at the end of the game because there was a technical free throw of some kind. Tip in. And then in 2002, against the Spurs, so the third championship, it's game 4 again. He scores the last 8 points of the game on 2 threes and a game-winning rebound where he comes in. I think Fisher may have missed a shot. Kobe comes in from the 3-point line, overruns the rebound because it's a long rebound, reaches back so far with his left hand that his arm is almost parallel to the floor, grabs the ball, puts it back in, and the Lakers end up winning the game. Like, it just underscores that he was great at every part of the game when he wanted to be, and it was not just a score. So those are a couple of my favorite games. That 48-point game, the Pacers game you mentioned. I loved 2010 against the Suns on their way to the last championship. He closes out the Suns and he hits a dagger 3 right in front of Alvin Gentry on the sidelines and pats Alvin Gentry on the backside as he runs back up and down the court. Just an ultimate badass move. And Alvin Gentry is like, yeah, can't really say anything. Just smiles at him, kind of.
He just had such a flair and such a sense for those moments. And yeah, I mean, and so much of it gets, it fades over time. Our memories fade. I'm terrible. I do not have a photographic memory. I wish I did. There's a lot, like, man, you said it earlier, Zach, how, envious of me being there for all those. And I absolutely, at the time, it's just work and it's stressful as hell. And those teams were stressful to cover. And so there's a certain part of it where I probably didn't appreciate in the moment just what I was seeing, how amazing it was, what a once in a lifetime opportunity it was to cover those teams. Because it was, and this is not, by the way, this is not a woe is me thing. This is not like, sports writer, complaining like we all often do. It's just, It was. It's a hard job. It was 7 days a week attached to that team, and they were a handful. And so in the moment, you're just trying to keep up. At times, there's very few moments where you can sit back and go, "Wow, I just saw something really amazing."
And if you think detail and the stuff about his attention to detail is like it took a lot of, I mean, it did take a lot of work to produce detail, but like he had to put on a show for it. That's just how he was about basketball. He just saw it. So I've told this story on your podcast. Do you mind if I tell it on my podcast?
Of course. My
Kobe story is I wake up at 6 a.m. one day in New York and I have a text from some ungodly hour from a number I don't have, 949 area code. And it just says, "It's Kobe. Call me." And I wake my wife, probably threw like a Shaq elbow at my wife to wake her up. And I'm like, this has to be a hoax. So I called the only person at ESPN that I know that probably has Kobe's number, Ramona Shelburne. Said, "Hey, I got this text. Here's the number." She said, "It's Kobe. It's the real Kobe." And I said, okay. Then I proceeded to pivot into fear, which is I haven't actually been kind to Kobe in my writing or historical appraisal of where he ranks among. I probably have him a couple spots lower on the all-time greats. I wonder if as he nears retirement, because this is his last year, he sees this ESPN voice who's not so laudatory and wants to yell at him. And I pivot into fear. So I call Kobe because he said, "Call me." So I called Kobe. And he proceeds to talk about how NBA media is broken, the focus on championships and trades and who hates who. Ironically, of course, Shaq and Kobe became the modern day template for who hates who, was distracting from the beauty of the game. And he had found one writer among many who seemed to delight in the X's and O's of the game. And he wanted to talk about changing the media landscape. He didn't want to be on NBA Countdown. He didn't want to be another talking head. He wanted to just change the entire paradigm of how media was covered. And I'm sitting there on the phone being like, this dude is ridiculous. Like everything he's saying is ridiculous. So he invites me to come watch some Cleveland-Toronto conference finals game. I don't know what game it was. Cleveland won by 1,000,000 points at his office in Newport Beach. And I don't want to go because I'm ambivalent for many different reasons, not the least of which is this is going to be completely embarrassing for me. We're going to watch a game and I'm picturing he's going to pause it and be like, "So what do you see here? So what do you see here? So what do you see here? What's going on here? What should this player do?" And I'm going to be there like, I'm underqualified to be in this room, buddy. So I walk in and it's just Kobe. I thought it was going to be a whole group of people. It's just Kobe. We sit down and watch the game. He's like, "Hey, you want a beer?" I said, "Well, I'm not going to turn down a beer." And his assistant comes in with a 6-pack of beer. And to this day, I'm only 90% sure what kind of beer it was. I think it was Dos Equis, but I'm not sure. And we split the 6-pack and watched the game. And he's pausing it, pointing at like footwork stuff. "Do you see this?" He's doing detail in front of me. And then the game ends. I'm buzzed because I've had 3 beers. We split the whole 6-pack of beers. This is why I don't remember it well enough. I wish I had taken notes. I wish I had photographed. I wish I had taped it. And he's talking about how he wants to do documentaries about Bill Russell and find archival footage and break down a game from the 1969 finals and this and that. And he talks about how changing the way media covers the NBA it's so bad. It's like turning around the Titanic. And he's got all these grandiose ideas. And I walk out and I'm like, he's way over. He'll never accomplish any of this. This is all crazy talk. He'll never accomplish it. But that was how he was. And that night with Kobe, it's a full game. It's 3 hours of time, was one of the highlights of my career. It was a complete out of body experience. And like you, I wish that I had, I don't even, it still feels like an imaginary thing that happened. And it's crazy to me that he's gone.
Yeah. And look, I am envious of that experience you had with him. Certainly we had a bazillion conversations on and off the record, basketball, not basketball, whatever, just stuff. Talked about commercials. He sometimes would talk about how he made certain commercials. So we would just have all these just random conversations. And it's over the course of 7 years that I'm a beat writer. And then, others later after I moved to New York, but the majority of it is over those 7 years. But when you're the beat writer, when you're in a guy's face every day, like that's one of the things you realize in this business is that, the media, we're all a pain in the ass. But the beat writers are the biggest pain in the ass because we're there every day. So we're there for all the high highs and all the low lows, and we're there to say, why'd you miss that shot? Why'd you let that guy steal the ball? Why'd you miss those free throws? Like, why don't you get along with Shaq? Why'd you give those quotes to Jim Gray? And so you like, that was one of those funny tense moments. Actually, Jay Adonde loves bringing this one up. Andre Aldridge also loves bringing this one up. Kobe, I don't know if I've told you this story. Kobe gives that statement to Jim Gray, but Jim Gray presents it as, here's these quotes from Kobe. And it's like 5 straight paragraphs, extensive Kobe talking about Shaq getting toe surgery on company time and Shaq being out of shape and Shaq this and Shaq that. And I'm like, first of all, he's never said any of these things before. This is wild, but there's nothing on tape. Jim Gray's not playing a video or audio. And Jim Gray's a TV reporter. So I'm used to, if he's got an interview, we're going to see it, at least hear it. But it's just a statement that he has. I'm like, well, did he hand it to him? And I don't know why I was so obsessed with this, but I was like, so like, how did this happen? So Kobe, the first time he's meeting with the media after that, and I'm trying to get him to give us a detail about like, so, this interview that he gave him, because we don't see it. And Jim Gray's a TV interviewer. And I don't remember how I asked it, but I was being annoying. I'm sure I was. And Kobe cuts me off with a Howie. Because I'm talking, so he's talking over me, basically just to shut it down. So Andre Aldridge and JA will say this sometimes too, just do the Howie. But we're annoying, we're a pain in the ass. And so I think like the reason that Kobe, when he gave a lot of those really insightful interviews to national guys, it's often because the national guys are not the ones who are the pain in the ass who are there every day. And I got to experience the other end of that when I left LA to go to the New York Times, when I mostly covered the Knicks, but then I would go back to LA. Now I'm the national guy. Now I'm also working for a big national paper, but also I'm the guy who Kobe went through all these things with, good, bad, and otherwise, over 7 years. Now the first time, I'll never forget the first time I walked back into their gym in El Segundo as a Knicks beat writer who's now left. I'm not covering the team every day. I'm not the pain in the ass every day anymore. And I walk in and he sees me and his face lit up. And he's like, hey man, what's up, big time? How you doing? Whatever, New York Times. Da, da, da. And it was like, I was like his long lost pal from junior high suddenly. And it's not that we didn't have good times before, but there were also a lot of tense times. And the last time I'd covered him up close was that really tense 03-04 season. And so it's different when you're not there every day. So that's one. And then the second thing is to what we were saying. I wish I had kept more of the tapes. Of course, they were little micro cassette tapes back then. They would have been like degraded by now. I wish I kept more of the tapes. I wish I had the photographic memory of these conversations and interactions. I wish I'd taken better notes about all the things that did not go in the newspaper. I can go back and look at LA Daily News clips. I can go back. I've got every Microsoft Word document that I've ever typed a word about the Lakers in is still on my computer going back to 97. I've kept all of it. I'm a digital as well as a real life pack rat. It's all there, but I don't have those little moments.
Hoarder. It sounds like hoarder, actually, maybe would be a better word.
People in my community prefer pack rat.
In your community. Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't realize there was yeah, I can close my eyes and I can see Kobe's conference room in Newport Beach. He sat at the head of the table. I sat to his right. The TV was on the other end of the table. And I could see him swiveling around in his chair. I can see the bucket of beer. It was in a bucket in the middle of the table. And I just wish that I could remember more of what we talked about. I remember him standing up at points to point things out on the screen. The game it was like a 30-point blowout. So we kind of stopped paying attention to the game and started shooting the breeze about other stuff. And I just wish I can close my eyes and see it, but I can't hear it. And part of the reason I can't hear it, except for these little snippets here or there, is because I thought it was something that maybe we would, and we would discuss basketball over text and email here and there, but I just didn't, you don't fathom it at the time as this thing that's you're going to want to freeze right there and remember forever. So I wish I remembered more of it.
Yeah, I absolutely do. There's a lot of that. There are things, it's funny, the things that stick with you. And I highlighted these in my remembrance column about him a year ago. And it's a couple of anecdotes that I've gone to on occasion because they were moments that are away from the cameras and they're not during games, but that always stick with me and that are more vivid, where I didn't have to strain to reconstruct it. They just had always stuck with me over time. But, one of them was they're on a practice day at the Forum, the arena before Staples Center, of course. And at that time, we'd go into the locker room, even on practice days, they weren't closed. And I walk in and I sit down, and it's less media then, so you could just do this. And I sit down, and he's at his locker, and I'm just sitting next to him at like Eddie Jones's locker or something. And there's a golf tournament. I don't know if it was the Masters or something on TV. And Kobe says, "Howard, man, you play golf?" I'm like, "No, not a golfer. What about you?" And he's like, "No, man, I would never play anything I couldn't master." And I say, "You can master basketball?" Says, "Absolutely. Absolutely." And that was one that I just had kind of like tucked away in the memory banks and then used a couple of years later. I think I told that story after his game 4 against the Pacers. I think I put it in my off day story the next day to kind of just illuminate like his mindset and the fact that he was on this track to become Jordan-esque because of that soaring confidence. And so it was like things like that. And it's the day that he brought his sisters to practice at LA Southwest College where they used to practice. And he introduced me to them both. And he was like just this proud brother of his sisters. And was like, this is why I always come back to these memories, is like that Kobe was so much more open and warm than the image that people have of him. And of course, there were tensions later with his family, and there were tensions with us in the media and everybody else. And so that moment could not have happened in the mid 2000s, but it was something that happened in whatever that was, 98, 99, in that range. And so those are the ones that always stick with me. I remember we're in the visiting locker room in Memphis. He had just done there was some commercial where I think he does he dunk from like half court or something? I think there's a commercial where he dunked, and this is not the one where he jumps over the car. That was later. This is early 2000s. And there was I think it was him like taking off from like the half court line or something and dunking, something crazy like that. And he actually said, "Well, you know how we did that? Because you don't write this, but here's how we did that." And so he explained the whole thing, which I now can't remember, of course, which is better that way. Let the magic remain.
Yeah.
But we just it was just these offhand, just casual, fun conversations about just stuff. And in a pre-Twitter era and with less media and less crowded locker rooms, guys didn't just have to be on all the time and have everything be official and know that everything was going to be tweeted in 2 seconds. There was just room to breathe and just have these offhand conversations. And so I wish I could have bottled all of those up and kept them with all the vivid detail that you appreciate about those moments or don't appreciate until years later.
Well, it's still shocking, still doesn't feel real. Even the memorial, when I was there that first week, seeing the people mill around the memorial, like I close my eyes and I see that packed LA Live and think, did that really happen? Like, that feels so weird. I don't know if we'll do this every year. Obviously Kobe's career is well trod. Everybody kind of knows the highlights and stuff, but it felt right to do it this year and sort of remember him as a player and a person. Not the best player of all time, not the best scorer of all time, not the best teammate of all time, not the most popular teammate of all time, but one of the greatest players of all time, one of the greatest champions of all time, and a player who, when you combine what he was on the court with what he came to mean to people way before his death, what he came to symbolize for people, the devotion that he inspired. I'm not sure there's been anyone quite like him in the NBA. And so, Mr. Beck, you can read Howard's piece at Sports Illustrated. We have a ton of Kobe content up at ESPN.com, including Ramona Shelburne has a wonderful story about the relationship between Pau Gasol and Kobe Bryant. Howard Beck of Sports Illustrated, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Zach. Appreciate it.